Good morning, everybody. My name is Roger Edwards and I'm the Marketing Director of Protection Review. And on behalf of the entire team, I'd like to welcome you to ProtectX7. Now, whether you're watching this live today on Thursday, the 29th of June 2023, or you're watching this as a replay later, I'd like to thank you so much for tuning in. I'd also like to thank our event partners, HSBC Life. We're delighted to have you on board for this event. The format for ProtectX7 is the same as always. We're going to hear from 7 speakers, each talking for 7 minutes, and we'll follow that by a live debate with me and 2 panel guests. We're looking at hot topics, controversial topics, topics that create debate. And we'd like you to take part in that debate as well. And today we're going to be using Twitter as our virtual chat room. All you need to do is to use a specific hashtag in all your tweets. The hashtag is ProtectX2023. That's ProtectX2023. Please use that hashtag in every single tweet, every single reply, and every single retweet. By using the hashtag, everybody will be able to see all the tweets and the replies and the retweets, and everybody will be able to pitch in with their own questions, their own comments, their own opinions, and their own observations. Before we get started, I'd just like to mention a few upcoming diary dates. ProtectZ, which is our conference where every speaker is age 30 or below, is taking place next week in London on the 5th of July, and there are still tickets available. So please check the Protection Review website if you'd like to come along. And the main Protection Review conference dinner and awards will be taking place on the 6th of December in person at the Landmark Hotel in London, and we'd be delighted to see you there. Our overall theme for ProtectX7 is the humanity of protection. Now, I'm sure we've all been to conferences over the years and we've heard speakers up on the stage and panelists saying things like, we need to be more human. And I was just thinking the other day, what exactly does be more human mean? Does it mean that we just have to be nicer to our customers? Does it mean we have to give great customer service? Does it mean that we have to communicate in simple language rather than corporate management speak and gobbledygook? Is it about remembering that our customers are real people rather than policy numbers or points in a data set? Is it about giving the sort of customer service that we would be delighted to receive? And how can we be more human when the latest trends suggest that we're going to surrender much of what we do to artificial intelligence? And here's one that I've been thinking about a lot recently. Is the fact that we spend a lot of our time talking about illness, about disability, and about death, is that desensitizing us so that when we do have to engage with our customers about such emotional and powerful subjects, that we are somehow lacking in our approach? These are all questions and issues that we're going to address in ProtectX7 today. And so I'm delighted to welcome to the virtual stage our first speaker. From Fairer Finance, please welcome James Daley.
We need to talk about consumer duty. There's only a month to go until the implementation date, and if your firm isn't caught in a flurry of activity to meet the deadline, then stop watching this video and call your CEO immediately. Okay. I'm assuming you're still watching, which means you're one of the vast majority of firms who've spent the last 18 months or more preparing for the duty. In the land of protection, of course, fair value assessments have already been part of the landscape since October 2021. But consumer duty reaches much further, asking firms not just to prove that they offer fair value, but also to prove that they have the right level of support for their customers, the right product governance, and that they're communicating with their customers in a way they can understand. That last one's a biggie. Many of the firms that we've worked with over the last 12 months are finding they've got the most work to do here. After all, the fact that most consumers don't understand our industry's jargon has been the worst kept secret of the last 2 decades. Everyone knew that their letters, policy documents and application journeys needed simplifying, but it's always been at the bottom of everyone's list of priorities. Consumer duty raises the bar considerably on that front. From the end of next month, It's no longer good enough to show that your documents are just clear, fair and not misleading. Instead, you need to prove that your customers can understand them. And if you're taking Consumer Duty seriously, it should be creating a lot of work. But it's important to remember two things. Firstly, the expectation is not that every firm is perfect by 31st of July. Companies just need to have identified areas where they need to improve and be well on the way to making those improvements. Work plans should be strictly prioritised, with fixes to prevent serious harms at the top of the list. The other thing to remember is that when a new piece of regulation throws up a lot of work, it's all too easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. The Consumer Duty is about proving that your firm is working to deliver good customer outcomes. Yes, that includes requirements to communicate more clearly, to tighten up your product governance and so on. But it also requires you to take a step back and look at the parts of your business model which may be as old as the hills, but were never really designed with great customer outcomes in mind. Number one on my list for the protection industry is question sets. As more and more people buy protection online without advice or guidance, most are still faced with lengthy, complex question sets which are uncomfortable and often intimidating. Many still ask you, for example, if you suffer from stress and anxiety, a question which to my mind invites a lie. Anyone who says no is simply not telling the truth. Questions about how much you drink, how much you weigh, whether you have the odd cigarette are all uncomfortable for the average person. Let's be honest, most people aren't truthful to themselves about these things, so giving the wrong answers may be more about denial than mendacity. Most people I've spoken to about applying for insurance admit to lying at some stage in their life, or at least stretching the truth from time to time. Presumably modern underwriting is all about second-guessing the lies. But who gets a better price? The earnest or the downright dishonest? The problem with this approach is, of course, that the consequences of giving a wrong answer can be incredibly serious. It may mean that they have a claim rejected when they're unable to work, or that a family doesn't receive the life insurance that they were counting on when the breadwinner unexpectedly dies. And of course, in that latter example, the applicant's not around to even defend their case. Until now, my perception is that the protection industry's approach to question sets has been to believe that it's up to consumers to answer them accurately, and if they don't, then it's reasonable for them to suffer the consequences, no matter how serious they are. But I'm not sure this approach passes muster in a consumer duty world. In this world, where firms are obliged to prove that they are working to deliver good customer outcomes, I think it's incumbent on protection insurers to support customers in giving the right answers and to help them understand the consequences of giving the wrong ones. And frankly, if that's too difficult to achieve in a direct-to-consumer environment, then maybe it's not reasonable to be asking those questions in the first place. Many consumers will never have heard of the lengthy list of medical conditions they're asked about in a medical underwriting journey and may have no idea whether members of their family have ever suffered from them. Equally, I think there are cleverer ways to ask people about their alcohol or smoking habits and get honest answers than simply telling them to put the number of glasses of wine, beer and spirits they drink each week, which most people don't have a clear hold on. While I was preparing for this video, I decided to run a few life insurance quotes of my own. Like most people, I suffer from occasional stress and anxiety, sometimes depression, and I've seen a therapist on and off for many years. The question sets relating to these conditions demonstrate no real understanding of how they manifest themselves. Personally, I don't and haven't ever taken medication for my mental health, but in the Underwrite Me journey that I went through, it was impossible to complete the question set without saying when I last took medication. I was only doing a mystery shopping exercise and I felt stressed and anxious just completing these questions. If this was my real life insurance application, I'd be concerned about the impact each answer would have on how much I got charged and frustrated at the experience of feeling like the insurance industry had no real understanding of how mental health conditions manifest themselves. I'm sure many people walk away and end up uninsured, which is not a good customer outcome either. One of the main problems here is the industry's desire to provide a personalised price for different sets of consumers based on their lifestyle risk factors. It's a problematic approach even if you have certainty that all the data is correct. But given we're dealing with a self-reported, very unreliable data set, and that premiums can vary by thousands of pounds over the lifetime of the policy depending on the answers that are given, perhaps it's time to think about a different approach. Certainly the status quo breeds distrust amongst consumers. Buying protection online rarely feels like a satisfying experience that leaves you with greater peace of mind about your family's security. But look, I continue to see Consumer Duty as a great opportunity for those firms that embrace it. It provides an opportunity to truly align the interests of shareholders and customers and paves the way for true competition on standards and culture. If you find yourself looking at a challenge in your market and thinking, I know it's not great, but it's got to be that way or our margins won't be as much, then it's probably time to get back to the drawing board. But the prize is a high functioning market where consumers understand both the benefits and limitations of your products and learn to love, trust and respect this crucial industry. Good luck.
Thank you so much for that, James. Lots for us to think about in that opening talk. Our next speaker is Head of Net Zero at HSBC. Please welcome to the ProtectX7 online stage, Claire MacKenzie.
Hi everybody, I'm here today to talk to you about sustainability and how this is showing up in the insurance industry. There are three things I'd like to talk to you about today. So the first is, what are the commitments that we're seeing from an external industry perspective? How is this actually showing up within a company? So what are the examples that we're starting to see? And why is this important, and what are the next steps that you should be taking with this? So the first thing I would say is, in terms of the commitments, we've seen a lot of external industry commitments that cut across the whole of the industry. Things like the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance, things like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance or the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance, and also the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. Now, the purpose of all of these commitments is to really bring the industry players together and to bring some consistency to what we're seeing across the industry. So what does good look like? And many, if not all of these commitments, have an annual disclosure requirement within them. So what are these actual commitments that are being made, and how are we seeing this come to life? So we're looking at this in terms of investments. So what you'll see companies talking about particular sectors that they no longer want to invest in. So this is things like coal, for example. But you're also seeing very specific sectors being looked at for the industry itself. So things like tobacco, for many life and health companies, many of these companies are moving away from tobacco as an investment solution. But not only are you seeing where they don't want to invest or where they want to withdraw investment, you're also starting to see increasingly from chief investment officers them looking at where they want to invest from an environmental, social and governance perspective, or ESG as it's called. And you're seeing this increasingly more and more. And when you look at the external statements that these companies are making, you'll see the chief investment officers talking about their longer term aims from an ESG perspective. In terms of propositions, this is coming across in terms of how do we best bring this to life for our customers? What are the offerings that can be given to customers from an ESG perspective? And here you're seeing things like ESG funds being made available directly to customers. But also last year, the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance came out with a big piece of work, which was an ESG underwriting guide for the life and health industry. It's the first time this type of guide had been created. And it's really to try and bring some consistency to the industry and to bring to life how ESG shows up from an underwriting perspective and what companies could be considering. So this is things like looking at air pollution from an E perspective and how does this impact the underwriting. It's also looking at things like inclusivity of products. So in terms of underwriting, the industry is very traditional. How can we change the underwriting criteria and be more inclusive in terms of financial relationships, in terms of financial dependence, in terms of family relationships, in terms of long-term health impairments that may not have traditionally been covered, but how can these be able to be covered now? It's also looking at things like supporting financial capability. So do we have lower premium points for cover that perhaps traditionally weren't there? Also, from a financial capability perspective, it's looking at how do we explain the product to our customers. Traditionally, the terms and conditions, the product literature, it's very complicated. An average reading grade is around university level of education. Majority of the population are not at that reading grade level. And so basically we're explaining products to customers in a way that is not accessible. Now, all of this is very much from the S side of ESG. And there are other things that we're seeing as well. We're seeing very much around prevention and looking at health and how we can actually encourage customers to be healthier. Again, this is all very much part of the S within ESG. In terms of operations, we're looking at how can we simplify the process? How can we bring cost out of the process, simplify it, but again, make it more accessible, but also reduce waste? How can we remove paper from journeys, for example? From a risk and compliance perspective, we're seeing increasingly risk policies. So from an investment perspective, you're seeing an increase in policies talking about where funds won't be invested or where assets won't be invested, but also where they'll be moving towards. From a compliance perspective, we're seeing a lot in terms of regulatory development, which obviously all of these companies need to adhere to. But why is this important? And what I would say is there are two things. One, companies need to be meeting these external commitments that they've made. But two, increasingly, customer insight is telling us that customers want to do business where it's very clear how they're approaching sustainability, how this is being brought to life, how this is being demonstrated to customers. And customers, we expect in the future, will be choosing where they want to take their product based on the ESG aspects of the company. That's a lot that I've gone through. But what I would say is, in terms of next steps, I would really encourage you to be curious. I would encourage you to look at the company websites, look and see their ESG commitments that they're making. Most of them, if not all of them, will have a sustainability section. Look at the disclosures that they've made and see how they're bringing this all to life in terms of investments, propositions, operations, risk and compliance. And also, I would really encourage you to go onto those websites of those external commitments that I've mentioned. So look at the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance, look at the initiatives that they have, look at the Net Zero Insurance Alliance and see what they're doing for the industry. And I would just encourage you to take your time to get closer to all of this work. The industry is really, really working hard to see how we can secure a better future for everybody.
Thank you, Claire, for that fascinating perspective. Now, the words that we use in our protection policies and our protection marketing are very important for customer engagement and customer understanding. Here to expand upon that is Sara Rayment from Inkling Legal Design. Please welcome Sara to the ProtectX stage.
We need to talk about legal design. Now, this is an important discussion because it's a way of making legal documents better and legal information easier to understand. So first thing you should know is that the law wasn't designed for people to understand it. In fact, if you're in a country that's based on the Westminster system, legal systems have been designed to be inaccessible. So they were designed to be expensive, bureaucratic, and difficult to understand. And in this day and age, with the technology that we now have, that's not really in an acceptable position. And legal design is on a mission to change that. So shall we dig into the detail? Legal design is a new movement. It's a new area of law and a new area of design, and it is still emerging as a potential market. What that means is there's not a lot of consistency in academia or in practice, but there is a momentum behind it. At its core, legal design is about making legal information wherever it's found easier to understand, more inclusive, and the hope is that that makes justice more accessible. What that means is that we see a lot of work around redesigning terms and conditions, disclaimers, contracts, and legal processes that help consumers and people who aren't lawyers to access information and to take steps in a legal process. For the most part, we see a lot of work in contracts and in terms and conditions. We do a lot of work around the world on terms and conditions, making them more accessible, best-in-class design, and align with brand values. There's a lot of techniques that we use to achieve that, but at its core, legal design uses the tools and methodologies of design to make this happen. One of the key tools that we use is design thinking. And we pair that with market research and some very traditional market research techniques, qualitative analysis, quantitative surveys, as well as observational data to really understand how people want to interact with legal information and to make it a better experience. I mean, you probably all know, both from the areas you work in and also your experiences as a consumer, quite often we're now seeing these beautiful online digital journeys where you get taken through what is a very good, considered brand experience. And when you're about to sign on the dotted line, you have to click that terms and conditions box and look at the terms and conditions, and you're met with a document that is long. It isn't very simple. It uses archaic language. It's often quite authoritarian and quite bossy. It's not visually pleasing. It's not written for you. And it's quite jarring to go from an experience that is designed completely for the user to one that is not designed with them in mind at all. So what we're seeing is a lot of organisations are starting to rethink and reframe the way that they produce their legal content and their legal terms and conditions. Some of that involves retraining the lawyers and working, getting lawyers to work with designers or legal designers to really understand how you can apply UX to law and other design principles. It's also research-based. So part of getting legal on board with doing this kind of work is to show the risk that arises from having people not understand terms and conditions. And some of those are legal and regulatory risks. And some of those are also brand and reputational risks, because that legal part, particularly in a digital journey, is really a step in the journey now. It's not a piece of paper that people put to one side or put in their bag. They tick the box. In some jurisdictions, they're forced to read every page. You have to at least flick through every page. And so trying to make this a better experience is incredibly important, but it's also just not acceptable anymore to write a document in a way that you know consumers don't understand, and regulators are becoming less tolerant of that. They're looking for ways to help people, particularly in financial services, to understand the burden and the risks that they're taking on when they buy a product. For us, we always look at terms and conditions as something that people might view before they sign up for a product, but ultimately it's something they're going to view when they have a problem. They're going to come back and look at this document when they're stressed or flustered or angry about an interaction with their organisation, and they're going to be looking for particular information. We want that to be a good experience. That is a significant moment in a brand's relationship with a consumer. So we want them to be able to find that information quickly, easily, and to understand it. And we do that by optimizing that content to make it as easy to understand as possible. We use plain language best practices, but legal design is more than plain language. We make sure that that content is designed to be as inclusive as possible. It complies with neurodiversity and accessibility international standards. That means that we might use different size fonts, different spacing. We make the document look more like it is part of that brand journey. So quite often we'll use images or illustrations to enhance that process. And above all, we use enhanced navigational features. So today, most people don't want to interact with information as though it were a hard copy document, particularly not in their digital space. They want to interact with that document as though it is a website or it is something that is a more interactive vehicle for information. So we design all of our content, including PDFs, to be used and navigated in that way, which reflects what users want. It really reflects that UX of information. The effect of that is significant. So we see in our impact testing, which is where we benchmark all of our performance of our projects, we see significantly improved comprehension. We see significantly less time being spent finding information. And then we see very positive sentiments around the brand, the fact that this document has been designed with the consumer in mind, a huge amount of appreciation for that. And so we adopt these across our projects with the effect that people can actually understand this information. And that can lead to all sorts of positive outcomes, one of which is consumers are more aware of their rights, they're more aware of what they're buying, there are less surprises in the product post-purchase, and we also hope to see less dispute escalations and regulatory actions as a result. The legal design is still conducting research in this space to look at the overall impact, but we know from the projects that we have completed that consumer sentiment is so different and it's so appreciated compared to seeing traditional legal documents that legal design is really the way forward for your legal function. Thank you.
Plenty of food for thought there from Sara. We're now going to turn our attention to artificial intelligence, AI, and how this might affect the way that we engage with our advisors and our end customers. So please welcome from Bright Blue Hare, Shân Millie.
Hello, and we need to talk about the humanity of protection and what that means for you as individual leaders and your relationship with technology and data. So I'm going to talk about AI and generative AI or Gen AI. And my message to you as protection practitioners, pathfinders and leaders is it's actually your responsibility to put data and tech in its rightful place and to transparently, purposefully and verifiably put it to work for your customers. So I'm not a fangirl of AI generally, and certainly not of Gen AI specifically. I am, however, very serious about developing a working understanding and knowledge of emerging technologies, about asking questions, and about trying to make sense of the answers. It's a huge focus for me in the work that I get paid to do in corporate innovation, and also the stuff I don't get paid to do in advocacy, activism, and information sharing. I believe in the social necessity, economic power, and actually the nobility of purpose that we see in the best of insurance and protection. I understand some of the pressures weighing down on leaders at all levels in all firms, from the smallest to the largest. And especially, those wicked problems around emerging technology, what you face in trying to make sense of fast-moving dynamic changes and attention-grabbing stuff that appears to promise so much, ChatGPT being the latest of them, and apparently with very little effort and actually very little risk, they say. And by the way, isn't everybody using ChatGPT now? Well, just like in insurance and protection in tech circles, there's stuff that is commonly known, those inconvenient truths that are common knowledge within a community that never make it outside of those expert circles. ChatGPT and generative AI actually are inherently incredibly risky for the business. These automated systems tap into vast, carbon voraciously hungry data sets. And those data sets, by the way, are sucked in without consent, without attribution, and 99% of the time with no auditability. You can't see where those sources are coming from. You can't interrogate those models. And then what happens is those chunks of data are literally slapped together in a plausibly coherent manner. So the way I think about it is like typing in a search query and getting back a return that could consist of stuff that actually isn't true or doesn't exist at all. What we know for sure already, though, is that text-to-image AI generates gender and racial stereotypes, exacerbates and amplifies virtually exponentially the inequalities, biases, and all kinds of embedded exclusion that's already there, but is amplified, as I say, virtually exponentially. To be honest, I wouldn't trust generative AI to tell me the time, let alone embed it in a claims process or, God forbid, make it my go-to for customer interaction. But back in the real corporate world, what do you do if your board, your investors, your peers, your boss, whilst recognizing there may well be, quotes, teething problems, nonetheless tell you to just get on and try it and experiment and do something anyway? Well, until very recently, when considering automated decision-making and profiling, there weren't really any regulatory drivers for leaders in the firm to prioritize positive outcomes for our customers over short-term revenues, profits, or analyst recommendations. Newsflash, there absolutely is a regulatory set of drivers now. And of course, I'm going to quote the EU AI Act, but I'm also going to cite our own Consumer Duty. One of the many impacts of Consumer Duty has been the enforced priority to fix well-known and long-lived deficiencies in people, process, technology, and culture. Well, no more talk. We must now measure, report, and verify our ability as firms to consistently deliver on things like fair value, creating products that customers actually understand, systematically identifying and supporting vulnerabilities, acting on foreseeable harms. And the clue is in the word foreseeable, isn't it? In my work, I'm seeing how Consumer Duty is fundamentally changing the way that transformation and digitalization projects are conceived and executed, changing corporate innovation and partnering focus, and actually straightforwardly changing operational spend as that July 31st deadline hoves into view. So, colleagues, we need to recognize that we are the original automators at scale. Automating decisioning and profiling based on personal data is the bedrock of protection. We've been doing it for a very long time. And as we all know, insurance and protection has big issues baked in already, whether it's out-of-date data sets. Think about the Institute of Actuaries and their work on diabetes from 2021, or the horrendous issues with lead generation and boiler room activities. Think what LifeSearch showed us in their protection insurance report from 2022, or whether it's the range of issues that the Access to Insurance Working Group, first led by Johnny Timpson and now by Zurich's head of life market engagement, Peter Hamilton, have brought to the attention of the participants and wider sector. It actually isn't any accident that the EU AI Act classifies AI systems intended to be used for insurance purposes under their high-risk category. That's any automated system for decisioning and profiling used for premium setting, underwriting, and claims assessments. Colleagues, that's us today, not even in some dystopian Gen AI flavored future. So, in conclusion, the humanity of protection means making critical thinking about technology and data your guiding light as practitioners and leaders in protection, and requiring outcomes that meet the standards set out by Consumer Duty, first and above all else. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Shân, for that perspective on artificial intelligence. And I'm sure we'll be talking about AI later today in the debate and possibly next week at ProtectX7. And now for the advisor perspective on the humanity of protection. Please welcome to the ProtectX7 stage from Pan Brown Mortgages, Nina Brown.
We need to talk about the humanity of protection. And I firstly wanted to focus on providers and how they're using their advertisement skills to promote this industry. Because for me, there's definitely positive and negative ways. So what makes an advert more relatable? What makes an advert get someone's attention? For example, Tyson Fury. He is on adverts for life insurance on the TV. When his voice comes on the screen, I do turn around, I do grab my attention, but is it relatable? Do you believe that he's actually selling a product that he believes in? Because for me, I personally don't. I think for providers, it's a complete waste of time and money getting influencers and celebrities promoting a certain policy if they don't actually truly believe in it. However, for example, AIG, they have recently brought out a podcast. They got Johnny Irwin onto the podcast to tell his story. Now, something like that is completely relatable. You buy into the product, the provider, and the story. So that is a great example as to how providers can be using advertisements to promote certain things in this industry. However, the question is whose responsibility it is to get these attentions from the general public. Whose responsibility is it to advertise to the general public? Is it advisors or is it the providers? Because for me, are certain providers spending their time and money advertising to the advisors, hoping to get more sales, rather than going directly to the consumer? Are providers pushing the responsibility to the advisors to make the general public more aware of this industry and the importance of it? Now, this leads me nicely into talking about the client journey after they sign up to a policy and how providers should be keeping the client engaged and therefore creating that human touch throughout the whole process. Now, at this point, I have to applaud providers like Vitality because their client journey for me is absolutely fantastic after they sign up to the policy. They keep the client engaged consistently. Personally, I have my private medical with Vitality. I was given an Apple Watch, which I would have to pay for unless I kept up with my steps, my activity. It's completely changed the way that I view my activity levels, and it's completely helped me engage with the policy and the product. The chance of me cancelling that policy is extremely slim because I want to carry on having my Apple Watch and tracking my activity. Vitality last year gave out 60,000 activity tracking watches, including the Apple Watches, to their clients. But not just that, they sold 4 million Cafe Nero coffees last year. Therefore, every single day, those clients are waking up wanting a coffee, wanting to track their activity. They are completely engaged with the policy and the provider. Obviously, all providers come with added benefits, such as GP services, counselling services, physiotherapists. But how much likely is a client to keep engaged with the policy if it's a tangible asset compared to a service? However, I do have to highlight the positives of those services. Just say, for example, Alvi. They saw a 126% uplift in their GP services between the years of 2021 and 2022. They also saw a 71% uplift in their mental health support and a 61% uplift in their physiotherapist. Are these added benefits a great way to keep a client engaged through their client journey? Or are they simply just add-ons? Are they simply just gimmicks onto the policy to entice the client in? Now, for me, I'm a pretty young advisor, I'm 26, so you would think that I was all for technology. However, my client process is definitely more face-to-face. I do prefer to look someone in the eye when I'm selling them some sort of insurance. And for me, I try to keep the client engaged throughout as much as possible. I therefore have annual reviews with all my clients to make sure that none of their circumstances have changed. I think that's really important to make sure the client understands the importance of what they're taking out, compared to if they just went online and just bought the bog standard life insurance. I think keeping a client understanding and made aware of all the benefits that they receive through the policy is the main reason why the clients will then keep the policy. Now, my last point I want to make is around the language used around this industry and how advisors and providers can change this to make the journey much more simple. Now, is there a reason why all clients need to know all the ins and outs of the policy? Do clients really read all the terms and conditions to make sure that they are fully aware of all the terminology used? Do they really need to know what a GIO is or what a waiver of premium actually is? Because for me personally, I think it completely confuses the whole concept of why they're taking out the policy in the first place. However, the question is, whose responsibility is that to change that? Is it the advisors or is it the providers? During my meetings with clients, I try to make it as simple as possible. I will use my own terminology. However, my worry is then when the client then receives all the paperwork from the providers, they then see all the terminology that was not discussed and therefore confuses them and then creates another appointment just to explain all the terminology that they can then see in the terms and conditions and the policy summaries. Taking out insurance is a very scary thing for many people because you have to think about what happens when the worst happens. They're having to think about when they die, when they get cancer, when they become critically ill, when they are unable to work. So creating a more simple process would be really beneficial for both the providers and the clients. And this is where I do think technology will come into play. Providers, just say for example Guardian, who are mainly completely digital, I think that's an excellent way to make sure the client actually knows exactly what they receive. because many clients receive so much paperwork through the post from other providers, and that gets completely lost. If they have a digital account, they can access all their documents, and therefore I think will keep the client more engaged. I think the use of technology within this industry is an excellent concept, however I think it's more beneficial after the point of sale. I think before that, it needs to be more of a human touch. There needs to be something that's more relatable, and that's why I prefer doing all my appointments face to face. But after that point, the technology is the best and greatest way to connect with your clients and to make sure that they are fully engaged and continue that client journey. So I think the last question is, how do we retain that human touch within this industry? For me, it's very simple. It's just being relatable. It's making sure that every person has a story to tell and therefore is fully insured, fully protected and knows exactly what they get.
Thank you so much, Nina. Some great ideas and some great thoughts there. Now we're going to move on to a special video, and this video is a claims story, a real life claims story about a real person who also happens to be an advisor. Nowhere is the humanity of protection more important than during the claim stage. So here to introduce this special video from HSBC Live is Ben Walton.
Let's talk about where humanity is already displayed day in and day out in our industry. Our claims teams are there supporting our customers when they need us most. That's real humanity. Yet as an industry, we love to promote our product features and benefits, digital innovations, and how clever we are at paying claims. We celebrate our latest claims payment rates and gain headlines in trade press. But is all this filtering down to consumers? Evidence seems to say not. Research conducted during the pandemic gives us some useful insight. Fewer than 50% of people believe a life insurance or critical illness policy will pay out when a claim is made. 85% of people believed insurers will do all they can to avoid paying out. 15% of people said that a refusal to pay out was the main reason they wouldn't take out such policy. Consumer duty will further enhance the way we communicate our products and services, but will it help address this perceived lack of trust? So how do we build trust? We believe communicating real people's stories will go some way to illustrate the reality that there are real, caring people taking calls every day from customers, and that genuine claims will be paid. Maybe every time we have a client in front of us, we show them a real life story. Let's watch Debbie's story.
Hello, I'm Debbie. I was a mortgage advisor and I regularly advised clients to take out critical illness and life cover. So it was a no-brainer. I took this cover out myself when buying my house. I heard all sorts of reasons why clients didn't want cover. To overcome these objections, I always made it about people and not the features and benefits of the policies. When I discovered the lump, I made the appointment, thanks to my mum, and my GP referred me to the hospital. A week after that, I was called back and I was told it was breast cancer. I felt numb. My first thought was, I'm going to die and lose my hair. The day after diagnosis, I went into practical mode. I was looking for paperwork to see what cover I had, and the Monday morning I was calling up to discuss my diagnosis.
So as a claims handler, everyone I speak to is a real person with real fears and concerns. It's my job to provide empathy and comfort to them and clarity about their claim, to guide them through the process and make it as painless as possible. Our customers are going through enough without us adding to their worries. How did it feel then when you made that first call to us, Debbie?
Oh, I knew it was serious, but even with my industry experience, I didn't know if it was serious enough and if it would even be a valid claim.
So how was the whole experience claiming with it?
Well, it was really good to have a real person at the other end of the phone that understood what I was going through and that helped me through the whole process, made it simple to understand and very straightforward. And when I heard that my claim had been successful and the money was going in my account that day, it was just such a huge weight off my mind.
So how did the money help you from the claim and what difference it made to you?
The difference is incredible. I was able to pay off my mortgage in full. I took some time out from work knowing that everything was covered. After paying off the mortgage, I've used the money to do some home improvements. So I've just genuinely made things better for me and everything's now a lot less stressful. I do have ongoing issues after the cancer, and I have been diagnosed with lymphedema, which is a build-up of fluid after surgery. Having had my mortgage paid off in full has made everything much easier to cope with, as I have been able to take a role that allows me to keep using my mortgage and protection knowledge without the stress, and now work a 4-day week. I've joined a group of women that have all been through breast cancer, and we support each other and the new ladies that sadly join us on a regular basis. 1 in 7 women will get breast cancer in their lifetimes, and we support each other to get through the treatment and the ongoing longer-term issues. Having the protection in place has made a huge difference to my life. The claims process was very straightforward and made so much easier by Heidi, who talked me through it all. My message to colleagues, friends and family, having cover is so important that I still to this day shout about it to everyone. I want to make sure that should the worst happen and you have a critical illness, you will have cover in place. I will never shy away from telling people about my cancer and use it to make people aware of the difference having the cover made to me and could make to them should the worst happen.
So we do experience a lot of time when customers call us and immediately we're on the back foot because they are expecting us not to pay the claim. But in reality, we are actually here to look after them and we guide them through the process, what we're looking for. This then often reassures them. When we then actually call the customers to tell them the claim has been paid, they're often delighted and very impressed at how quick and easy the whole experience was.
Let's talk about the key takeouts from hearing Debbie's story and the insight from claims handler Heidi. We need to break down the barriers to buying cover. We need to help customers better understand the risks they are protecting themselves against. We need to maintain a focus on reducing accidental or deliberate non-disclosures. These drive the bad press stories. The continued improvement of front-end, automated and expert application and underwriting processes will support this. We need to improve the way claim statistics are communicated, get them out to consumer press, backed up with real people's stories, like Debbie's, and better explain the claims process itself. And finally, we need to better equip advisors to tell the story. Debbie had the misfortune to tell hers as an advisor who'd also been a claimant. We need to support advisors in delivering deeper levels of humanity when discussing protection.
My message to advisors: take your own advice and make sure your clients take it too. You never want the diagnosis of cancer or other serious illness. You never ever want to make the claim I did. But if it happens, I can assure you that life without the financial support would be a life I couldn't imagine, and thankfully, I didn't have to.
It's always good to see a strong case study for a protection claim, isn't it? And we come to our last speaker of ProtectX7. He's a well-known humanitarian and author. We're also delighted that he's just been knighted in the King's Birthday Honours. Please welcome to the virtual stage Sir Terry Waite.
We need to talk about human values and their importance for good mental and physical health. For many years, I worked as a hostage negotiator, and this is a very difficult and dangerous task where one never knew whether one was going to face captivity oneself or in fact be killed. It was a risk that I took myself, and I faced difficulties and dangers on many an occasion. I began by negotiating, first of all, with General Amin many years ago in Uganda for the release of hostages, and later on with Colonel Gaddafi, with Hezbollah, and with many other different groups of people around the world. Eventually, I was captured and found myself in a tiled cell without any companionship and with the threat of imminent death over my head all the time. I had to learn how to survive, how to, in fact, face the extraordinary tensions of that situation. We do live in an age when stress seems to be on people more and more. There's a compelling desire to achieve, and one is never certain of one's position in life. It can often be very threatening and difficult. But in this situation of extremity, when I was by myself in a tiled cell, the stress level was increased dramatically. And initially I had no one to speak with or talk with. I was alone for 23 hours, 50 minutes a day. When anyone came into the cell, I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes, so I couldn't see anyone or talk with anyone. I did face torture, physical torture. They took me into a room. They asked me to lie down, and they beat me on the soles of the feet with cable. That was extremely painful, and I couldn't walk for a week after that. I also faced a mock execution. I was told I had 5 hours to live. And at that point, when they told me that, I simply lay on the floor and I fell asleep. It was as though my body was coming to my aid. And I remember years ago, the late Carl Jung saying, if you're in a situation of extremity, allow your body to come to your aid and it will. And in some strange way it did. It enabled me to sleep. After what I imagine was about 5 hours, they came, they took me into another room. They asked me if I wanted anything at all. I said, yes, I'd like a drink. For the first time in my life, I had felt my throat had gone dry. Dry from fear, not fear of death, because death will come to us all eventually, but fear as to how I would die. Would I be beheaded, strangled? How I would die? They brought me some water. They said, do you want anything further? I said, yes, I'd like to write a letter to my family, my friends. They said, you could write one letter. And so I composed this letter and wrote it, looking beneath my blindfold. I said, do you want anything further? I said, yes, I'd like to say a prayer. I said, you can. And I said the Lord's Prayer out loud because I wasn't going to be intimidated in any way. And they said, turn around. I turned around and I felt cold metal at my forehead. Then they dropped it and said, another time. Well, at that point, that was after the first year. First year spent in a cell with no natural light, no companionship, no books or papers, nothing at all, just by myself. And they said at that point they were going to release me. And for a couple of weeks, I went into good accommodation. And then after that, for some unknown reason to myself, I was put back into normal hostage accommodation, where I spent the next 4 years, chained to the wall for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day and one visit to the bathroom, and no books and papers for over 3.5 years. Towards the end of that experience, I became very ill. I had a very bad bronchial infection, which really did cause me some distress, and I couldn't lie down at night. I had to keep sitting with my back against the wall. And I was moved to be with other hostages. There were 4 of us in the room, all chained to the wall. And at night, when I was struggling to get my breath, one of the other hostages, Terry Anderson, an AP journalist, just leaned across and he put his hand on mine. Just a small gesture. He never said anything. He just put his hand on mine. And I found that terribly comforting. I've often felt that when I visited people in hospital or other such places, I've often wondered, what should I say? But I realized it isn't what you say. It's the fact that you're with somebody. You're there. And that was tremendously supportive, just to feel the presence of another human being. I think that's the case in life today. It's difficult, I know, to trust people. Trust sometimes can be at a low ebb. But if you can be with a team of people whom you can trust, whom you can share with at times, not necessarily everything, but just share with, just be with, and be supportive of them, then that is a tremendous, tremendous help. It can enable us to maintain ourselves, to be in at least good shape to face whatever comes. We need that protection. We need human values. And that's going to be increasingly the case in a world where we move more rapidly towards artificial intelligence. Don't lose our humanity.
Well, thank you, Terry, for that engaging and actually quite harrowing talk. And I think I'll remember the hand on the shoulder, the hand on the arm image for a long time to come. Now, before I introduce you to our panel guests and before we start the debate about the topics that we've heard this morning, I'd like to do what we always do at ProtectX, and that is to perform what's known as a Twitter thunderclap. This is a way of saying thank you to all of our speakers. So what I'd like you to do, wherever you're watching this from, is to open up your phone, open up your iPad, and just type in a very quick tweet into Twitter. Don't forget to use the hashtag ProtectX2023 and just say thank you to somebody or just thank you to the speakers in general. I'll count you down from 5 to 1, and then we're all going to hit the tweet key at the same time, and it creates a bit of a Twitter thunderclap. So I'll just give you a few moments to type something in, and that includes everybody who is at the watch party. I'd like you to do that as well, please, so that everybody can show their appreciation to the speakers. So here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hit that tweet button. Okay, now we come to the debate, and I'm delighted to introduce you to John Brazier from Cover Magazine and Mike Furniss from HSBC. Perhaps, John, you could start just by giving us a very quick overview about what you do at Cover Magazine.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So I'm the editor at Cover Magazine. So I'm in charge of everything editorial that we do and some of our events, which I'm hopeful that most of you will have been to in the industry watching today. And yeah, we are trying to be the best publication for the protection and health insurance market that we can be.
And Mike?
Head of sales for HSBC Life. I manage our senior BDM teams and telephony teams. And, you know, we're here to protect families in the UK.
Fantastic. So I wanted to start off by thinking about what Terry Waite said. And yes, it was engaging. Yes, it was harrowing, but it was also an incredible story, wasn't it? Very emotional story. And a lot of us can remember this actually happening in real time. And I think stories came across through quite a few of the talks we've heard this morning. And indeed, storytelling comes across not only at protection review events, but we've heard it talked about by speakers on stage at other industry events. So I just wonder whether one of the lessons that we can take from Terry's talk is that we actually have to become better storytellers across the industry. Could I turn to you, John, to get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, ask the journalist about stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, generally speaking, I think the protection industry is getting better at telling stories. I think we've identified that real stories are the key to communication with the consumer market. And you use the word harrowing for Terry's story, and it's the right word. It's difficult to listen to. And when we are dealing with products like life insurance, critical illness cover, these are difficult subjects to address. And it takes real stories to break through that resistance, that part of our brain as humans that shies away from the difficult, shies away from the hard subjects that we don't want to think about. And it takes real people to do that. You know, we saw Debbie's story from the HSBC video as a prime example of this. And I think the industry is generally doing better to tell these stories in a better way, in a more human way. Again, it feeds back to Nina's point earlier about the use of influencers and celebrities. That's not telling a story, that's selling a product. And I think consumers are far more savvy to this than they ever have been before. So real stories, real people, this is the key going forward. And I think the point you've made about emotion is key here as well. You know, stories, effective stories elicit emotional response regardless of format, regardless of channel. And this has to be the center of storytelling for this industry going forward. So I do see progress. I think the one thing I would say in terms of how we improve is acknowledging the hard facts, acknowledging the difficult conversations. You know, listening to Terry, it was very hard to hear about his personal experiences. but you come away informed, and that's the key here, is to inform people even on the difficult subjects with stories.
And Mike, what's your take on this? Are we doing enough?
Yeah, well, I suppose not too much more to add to what John's already said, but for me, 100% we need to be better at storytelling. And I think the reason why is both on an individual basis and on a company basis. As you get older, and I'm getting older, unfortunately, I lost my parents when I was fairly young, and I've seen, again, unfortunately, I've lost a number of friends along the way. But what that does kind of show you sometimes is the devastation that's left behind where people haven't made a will, for example, and what happens then, where people don't have adequate protection in place and the devastation that can leave behind. So I think storytelling is so important, because without that, protection is just black and white, and those stories turn it into colour. So I think it's really important.
I think that's a good point, actually, Mike, because the amount of people I've heard tell me their personal story. I came into protection because, I lost my dad, they didn't have protection, and that shaped my childhood, and it's led me to this point, is kind of inspirational in a way, and perhaps that's a way we can draw more people to the industry through these stories as well.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, again, I took from the talks today was linking it back to what Terry said, but also the claims video. As an industry, we are talking about quite difficult subjects all the time. Let's face it, we're talking about death, we're talking about disability, we're talking about illness, we're talking about disease. And those people who are handling the claims day in, day out, it must be quite a harrowing experience for them as well. And I said in the introduction earlier, are we to a certain extent becoming desensitized because we're exposed to this every day? And does that affect our ability not only to do our work, but also to maybe to tell these stories? So what can we do more as an industry to look after our people who are exposed to this, and also translate it into something positive, a story, as we've already discussed? So I think, Mike, that probably comes back to you.
Yeah, no problem. Fundamentally, our claims teams at HSBC are there to support our customers. And as you say, there are some very, very difficult conversations that have to happen with customers and people that are really fragile at that time as well, and really need that help and support. But as you say, then what happens and what support's there for claims handlers going through those difficult conversations themselves? So I can talk a little bit about kind of what we do at HSBC Life. So firstly, there is a buddy system there, if you like, where people are paired up, so they can talk about those conversations and go through some of those interactions and get some support kind of internally in the first instance, if you like. So that's in place. If things kind of move on from that, we offer a counselling service also to our claims handlers, which they can access. And we go even further than that, really, because we have obviously links with MS Society, Maggie's, Mind, and those regular interactions with the claims handlers are focused on customers and how we help our customers through those difficult times, but also on the claims handlers as well and what they're going through. So there's support and counselling there through the three that I just described there. And then I think lastly, within our claims team in Bristol, also one of the new members of staff there that's working for us is an ex-mental health support nurse. So there's another mechanism in there to help. And I think it's so important.
Mm-hmm. John, any thoughts on that?
I think it's good to hear that from HSBC, and one would hope that this is similar stories across providers in our industry, that we recognise the internal humanity of the people who work within protection. We are very focused on consumers, rightly so, especially coming up to consumer duty. But there is an onus as well to look after our own to a certain extent. And I think that perhaps is in the background sometimes a bit too much. And stories, again, like Debbie's, where you had the claims handler involved in it, that personal experience only adds that layer to that story. These were the people that dealt with her case. So I think, looking after our own people who are doing this stuff, like you say, claims handlers, hearing, traumatic things on a daily basis, providing the right support to them is just as crucial to providing the right support to consumers because if one side of that fails, consumers don't get the experience or the service they need as well. So it's encouraging to hear, and one would hope that this is just as much of a focus in many ways.
Yeah. And let's turn our attention now to language. We've talked a lot about language in the protection industry for as long as I can remember. I've always been on a bit of a personal crusade to try and cut out the management speak, the mumbo jumbo, the gobbledygook. But unfortunately, we do tend to still use quite complicated language. And I love that phrase that Sara said in her talk. It was something like, legal language isn't meant to be understood. But our customers, we owe it to them, our clients, we owe it to them to make it easier for them to understand not only our policies and our marketing messages, but the questions that we ask them. James made some really interesting points about the question sets that we see in our online application forms. What more can we do to introduce simple language across the board? John?
I think it's a tricky one, because obviously there is compliance to think about here. There is an obligation to present products in a factual way, and sometimes it is difficult to boil that down to language consumers can easily process and understand. So I think the key here is the accessibility element. We are never going to escape jargon. We're a financial services industry, therefore jargon is sort of baked in to a certain extent. So I think making information readily available, building in factors like Sara mentioned, like font size, text, even these minor changes can make a huge difference to a lot of people. And simplifying where we can is probably going to be our next step. Beyond that, you would hope potentially we can start cutting down jargon, finding ways to communicate with consumers in ways that they want rather than the ways the industry wants or the compliance department wants. Perhaps there's a regulatory question here that I'm not going to go into, but I think the onus is on the industry, not on the consumer, to address understanding, as James rightly pointed out. And I think it's time the industry really starts taking that very seriously, without the need to be pushed by the regulator to do so, because it's the right thing.
Do you think compliance and the regulation sometimes becomes an excuse?
Oof. Put me on the spot there. I think to a certain extent, yes. I think that if you give someone an out, they will take it. I'm not saying that for the entire industry, by the way, before people start taking to Twitter, but it's a convenient excuse, let's face it. So it comes back to the fact that these are products that can be complicated, and there is a compliance element. So it's kind of a catch-22 in my view. I think you've got a compliance element and you've got a consumer. Finding the balance is tricky, and I'm sorry to say I don't have any answers of how to do that.
I think sometimes we just I like to communicate in simple language, and I always think that if you go down to the pub with a colleague, you don't say passive language. A couple of pints will be bought by me for us. You'll just say, I'll go and get us a couple of drinks. But when we find ourselves in a corporate environment, we just seem to layer the passive language on, we layer the jargon on. What are HSBC doing to try and make things easier for both advisors and end customers to understand?
Yeah, certainly. So I suppose the first point with advisors, I think every life insurance company is judged on the length of its declaration that maybe have to read out to a client. So we are doing a lot of work on that and to simplify that as well. So it's easier for advisors to relay all that information off. No one wants to read out a page of information to a customer, particularly over the phone, because it's disengaging, and people have only got so much time to kind of deal with the advice process. So we are looking to shorten where we can there. In terms of documentation, the dreaded T's and C's, and someone says it's in the T's and C's on page 8 under paragraph whatever it may be. Same when you sign a mobile phone contract, you sign it. Do you read all the T's and C's? Maybe you don't. So I think, we are working alongside our literature and how we make that more accessible, how we shorten things, and how people can see all the key information really, really quickly, rather than us having to go through a huge document that people don't want to do.
Yeah, I always love my pop culture references, but watch the first episode of the new series of Black Mirror for a really interesting lesson in what happens if you don't read the small print when you click on an acceptance to an online service. It really is quite scary. I think there's quite a nice link between what we've been talking about here about language with AI. And Shân actually sounded a few alarm bells, I think, about the use of AI, and especially she was talking in quite a lot of detail about ChatGTP. And from a marketing point of view, I've seen a lot of talk about ChatGTP over the last few months, and indeed it seems to me, to a certain extent, that people seem to be quite keen to surrender their humanity and indeed surrender their creativity to AI. And I think Shân made some really good points about us using it as a tool as opposed to a replacement. And there was a lot of talk going on the Twitter stream as well. Zoe Mears from iPipeline was saying we shouldn't be scared of it, we just need to understand it and use it correctly. Settle Meta made some interesting comments about it as well. You know, we have to embrace it, it's here to stay, it's going to keep developing. But at the moment, it really is just a predictive series of words that come out. It's not sentient, it doesn't have feelings, it can't emote with us, it doesn't empathize with us. And perhaps as humans we shouldn't anthropomorphize, I always struggle with that word, over ChatGPT and AI. So Mike, what are the consequences that you see about AI coming into the industry and becoming more used, and how do we effectively use it as a tool rather than as a replacement?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, kind of imagine a world now where there are no application forms for life insurance of any kind. And open banking's evolved, so obviously it knows where you bank, it knows how much you earn, it knows where your favourite places to eat are, what you do on a Saturday morning, it knows all your direct debits, all your payments, whether that's gym membership, lathe weights, whatever it may be, it knows everything about you and your life. And what happens with all that information is it goes into an insurance company and all that data's pulled through. And based on all that data, it then says, okay, well, from what we can see, you're really healthy and you live in a certain area and you do all these different things. So you're scored, and I'm just making this up now, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're scored 3. And that means you're really healthy. So you can get life insurance at a certain rate. Someone else could be scored 7, and that means something else. And that might be they get loaded slightly. But it takes it to a level where it understands everything and pulls it all through. So you don't need to complete an application form. Now, there starts to be some problems there with that data, because I just mentioned that I got a direct debit to lathe weights. So I'm drinking wine, am I? Oh, and is my partner drinking a lot of wine because I'm ordering 15 bottles a month? But my partner hasn't had a drink for 15 years. So is she going to be treated the same as me on the application form, because all that data has been scraped from an account that's joint? So it could lead to lots of inconsistencies and how people are judged maybe on life insurance. But I think this kind of technology is coming in some way, shape or form, because it's advancing all the time. So it could lead to a situation like that.
And John, are you going to be replaced by ChatGTP anytime soon?
Who knows is the better question, because we've all asked ourselves, doesn't matter what job we do, we've all asked ourselves that question. I remember being at a previous publication, hearing the exact same conversation happening about traders in the asset management space. Are we going to be replaced by algorithms? And this was the best part of a decade ago. And now the same question's being asked in protection. Are we going to be replaced by AI? And in the future, eventually, potentially, we're nowhere near that point now. These are emerging technologies in many ways. It's kind of, as Zoe pointed out, and as Shân's video explained, these are tools meant to supplement and augment, not supersede the humanity. And I think that's where we potentially get a bit caught up in the hype sometimes. Shân's point around how these systems are designed, intentionally so, where you are dazzled by the shiny front end that we all see when we put something into ChatGPT. The back end, we don't understand. And I think, again, that's the crucial point here. People assume it's a sentient being or it's this incredibly complex system. It's a set of rules engines. It's an algorithm that is following a chart and spitting out scraped data in response. And once you sort of look at it from that view, you think, how can it provide the same level of insight and context that a human being can have, especially in protection, where you've got a lot of different variables to consider. You've got to take into account, so like you said, Mike, with the drinking thing, there's a lot to consider that a human brain can process far superior than an AI tool can. And I think we're at that sort of inflection point, or coming up to that inflection point. Again, to make a pop reference, the Jurassic Park line, we're too busy thinking about whether we can, whether we should. So I think really it's incumbent on the industry, the decision makers, the leaders, to look at these tools in the cold, hard light of day and say, how does this help us and our consumers? And ultimately, in the context of what we're here to talk about, adopt these tools while still ring-fencing the humanity of our industry.
There's a parallel, actually, isn't there, to way back when we first embraced telephony, perhaps. I can remember when we started offshoring some customer service functions to India and other countries. And a lot of that was driven by trying to cut costs, wasn't it? It was cheaper to offshore than it was to hire the people in the UK. And whilst it might have cut costs, I think everybody would probably agree that it actually led to a degradation in the service that we were offering. And then after a time, we started onshoring all of that service again. I just wonder whether there are parallels here with AI, that the temptation might be, let's use AI to cut costs. Yeah. But will it potentially not only remove some of the human element, some of the human contact, but could it also lead to a degradation in our service as well? And we desperately don't want that to happen. And we do know that quite a few advisors say that the service from the industry hasn't really returned to where it should be following the pandemic. So there's quite a lot for us to think about there. Mike, thoughts from you on the service element?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The service element, you can't lead to a degradation of service. I mean, you talk about, we've got fair value, haven't we? So if someone's actually paying for a product and you're looking at kind of price versus what someone's getting for that, and part of that, and there are lots of different layers, obviously, from added value services down to actually what level of service do you get? If you call in and want to speak to someone, how quickly is that phone answered? If an advisor, for instance, emails in, how quickly has someone got back to them? If it's an underwriting query, how do you get back? So I don't think you can lose that human element that's in there, because when things get really complicated, and there are lots of different tools, aren't there? If someone's got an underwriting query, there's underwriting tools you can use. But when these things get quite serious and people looking for cover, I don't think you can remove that human element. And I think if you push more towards technology, I think there's only so far you can go. We all want to embrace technology and we all want to move forward. But how far do you go before you do hit that degradation of service? Because the answers aren't there.
Mm-hmm. John, any thoughts on the service element?
Yeah, I think to your telephony point, it's about evolution, isn't it? Businesses and business industries will always go through this, and we are now at another point with AI, and there will be one after that, and there'll be one after that, and it's a cyclical conversation, I think, to many ways. It was like, how is this going to impact service? How is this going to impact consumers? And there will be bumps in the road. It's just the nature of how these things are implemented. There will be mistakes made. So I think it's a good opportunity at the end of the day to enhance service. And I see and hear complaints from the intermediary space about waiting times or overall service elements. I think generally speaking, there is a discontent at the moment, but I think we are in a period now where the industry is generally taking a very hard look at itself. And I think that's a positive thing. We are recognizing and being self-aware where improvements can and should be made to the betterment of consumer outcomes and the industry as a whole. AI feeds into that, but it's only one element. It's a mixture of what all our speakers this morning have talked about, really, and acknowledging that there are difficult conversations ahead, there are difficult choices ahead, But if, again, you are squarely focused on the right results, you are squarely focused on consumers, you will get there. But it's addressing those road bumps in the way that's the key.
And I think it is, again, to repeat, it's keeping our understanding that this is a tool, not a replacement for a human being. And we really do need to keep that human touch, because undoubtedly we will be using this technology more and more in the future. I'd like to turn now to something that Nina said during her talk. And now Nina said she was 26. And one of the things that may be quite surprising was that she made the statement that a lot of her clients really value that face-to-face contact. Now, the assumption, and probably the incorrect assumption, is that younger people actually don't mind. We don't need face-to-face. We're all happy to do it on Zoom or on Teams or WhatsApp, etc. But here we have a young advisor saying that she prefers to do face-to-face, and a lot of her clients really appreciate that. And here's a lot of us assuming that young people don't want that. Does that mean that we're not talking to younger people enough to discover what it is that they want, not only from the products that we offer, but also from the service? So, Mike, what are your thoughts on that contact and the research that we need to do to connect with younger people and get them thinking more about protection?
Definitely. Firstly, I think face-to-face is crucial for a lot of people. And you've only got, if I take everyone back a number of years, and you look at robo-advice that was coming in many, many years ago, and everyone was worried about what was going to happen, and people would switch off from advisors, that's financial advisors, protection advisors, the whole industry. And this would come in and people could just follow a decision tree and they can get the outcome, and that's great, and there's a solution and everyone will buy into that. Well, that never happened. There's a kind of a low take-up rate in the industry, and that kind of dropped away over a few years. So I think education with younger people is really, really important. Now, when do you start that education? So you could take that right back to people that are actually going to schools and talking about how you can manage your money. And there's an education program that could go in. And I know some insurers are doing that, and I know some kind of wealth managers are doing that as well to help people understand. We've got people now that are going to university coming out with huge amounts of debt that sits behind them. So how could you pay that off quickly, as an example? But in protection in particular, there is a conversation that needs to be had. And it's not as simple as X plus Y plus Z and answer this question equals, you need £50,000 worth of life insurance. All of that, when you bring it into a big conversation, and we've got consumer duty that was talked about earlier on, well, who's going to talk to them about income protection? Particularly if you're younger as well, and you're either renting or you're buying your first place, and all of a sudden your income stops for whatever reason, on a health basis that may be. Then it's all of a sudden the whole pack of cards comes down because no one's talked to you about it before. And is any form of decision tree going to give you all of that? And also, and importantly, explain what will happen to you if you don't have that cover in place, and how it will affect your family and their emotions. And people need to talk about emotions. So I think education with younger people is vitally important to protect them.
Yeah, and we come back to emotion and storytelling again. Yeah. John, this subject's come up in Cover Magazine and at your events quite a lot. This need for the industry to engage more with younger people, and what do you think we need to be doing now? I know you're often quite rightly critical of the industry for saying we need to do more of this, and then going back to the office and actually not doing more of it at all. What can we do to start looking at these things in scale and getting more done?
I think Mike's point about financial education is core to all of this. We've seen people say, I came out of school, I don't know how a credit card works, I don't know what a mortgage is, and that's a bigger failing on a governmental education level, and that needs to be addressed going forward. And I completely agree with that. I think there are good examples of where this is taking place, where we see, like Mike said, insurers. I know of intermediaries who take the time to go to schools, to talk directly to students, people 15 to 18 who are thinking about the next stage of their life, to tell them about protection, to tell them about the basics of finances. And that needs to happen more, really. I think it's a case of, again, touching on something we said earlier, the industry taking the onus to do this, not waiting for consumers to come to them and say, okay, now we'll explain it to you. It's a case of being proactive. It's a case of, again, addressing that point of it's all fine to sit around and talk about it, but you've got to do it. Intention without action has little value, I think. The industry is full of great intentions. There's no question about that. But I think where it can often fail, or stumble at the very least, is that action part for a number of reasons. But if we want to really engage with young consumers, the Gen Z or the younger edge of the millennial group, we have to be proactive. We can't keep waiting for them to come to us. And I think it's incumbent on trade bodies to get involved with this. I know the IPTF has done quite a lot of good work here around educating young people on IP, and that's great to see, and we need to see more of it. So it is a case of everybody realizing this is my responsibility to do something about this. And if I don't do it, maybe other people won't. So again, it's that onus on the industry taking action to rectify a problem it might encounter further down the road.
Yeah, we need to be talking to younger people. And coincidentally, Protection Review is running another event next week in London, ProtectX7. And all of our speakers are aged under 30, and we're using this as a launch pad to try to get to the heart of some of these issues, to find out what younger people want and how we can engage with them. It's amazing how the time flies when you do these panel talks. We've been talking for about half an hour. Time's flown by, so I'm going to try and bring it to a close now, perhaps with a very quick finish from each of you, Mike and John. What's your one take or your one hope for the humanity of protection that you've taken out of today's events? I'll go with you first, Mike.
Yeah, humanity of protection. From a face-to-face point of view, understanding people and understanding what everyone's going through. That's our customers, that's people within our business as well, and making sure everyone is treated fairly.
And John?
I think, kind of feeding off what Mike said, it's truly understanding what customers want and need, not what the industry thinks they want and need. And that's only done through the communication.
Fantastic. And from my point of view, storytelling will always be at the forefront of what I like to see people doing. So let's see more stories being told, more claims case studies, just like we saw from HSBC there. Thank you everybody so much for watching ProtectX today. Whether you watched it live or whether you're watching this later on the replay, we really do appreciate you tuning in. Please do continue with the discussion. Use that hashtag ProtectX 2023. Just keep talking and we'll keep bouncing those ideas about. So thanks very much to Mike. Thank you to John. Thank you to HSBC for partnering with us. And we'll see you hopefully at ProtectX7 next week, the 5th of July. We do still have tickets. We'd love to see you there. Check out the website. And that's it for ProtectX. Thank you so much for tuning in.